it's necessary, right? Because a lot of times, like, I thank my parents for sometimes disciplining me the way they did, even though it was a little extreme, but they probably had it done to them and whatever, right? But when I came to Canada, because back home there's no laws against like not hitting your kids, right? They hit you at school, they hitting me with, like, with rulers if you don't do your homework. So I have to make sure my homework was on time. Like, that discipline came here. So when I came here, everything was so slack. The whole public system was so slack. I was like, oh my God, I learned this in like grade 1.
The generation that was before me, my grandparents and my parents, those were very tight-lipped, generations where they really did not talk about traumatic events that happened in our life. And as a result, we received the results of their hurt. So all the behaviors that were dysfunctional that we saw from them and that we took as like, this is the way that we should be, or the way things are, is all the result of them not dealing with their own stuff and thinking that it's not impacting the way they're parenting or the way anything is going. And we became a messed up generation.
Mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and act. It also helps determine how we handle stress, relate to others, and make healthy choices. Mental health is important at every stage of life, from childhood and adolescence through adulthood. Does that sound accurate?
Yep. Okay. Yes.
That's what Google said. So I always like to have like a definition, a base of where we're starting, so I know exactly what we're talking about.
Yep.
I wanted to say really quick that's really good, especially adolescents, and I know Nelson can definitely talk about that. But so a way that I like to look at it, and Nelson, you tell me if I'm off, but it's like we have, and this is just a broad, like, I guess, analogy, but it's like we have personal training, for example, to help someone who doesn't have heart disease, doesn't have diabetes, whatever, but they want to work on their health. And then eventually, it's going to be preventative and things like that. But it's like we don't have that for mental health. And it's like when someone is maybe diagnosed or maybe not, it's like, what do you do about it? That's something that has really drawn me to the profession I'm in now, because it bugs me when not all therapy is the same, but it bugged me that I was never really taught, maybe I didn't pay attention. Okay, I'm feeling this way, but why? And I'm doing these things. Why? Like those actions. What am I feeling? And what am I thinking? And can I change that thinking? Actually, I can. So it's like things like that, that's actually concrete and that can be applied right away. But I just like to compare it to personal training as far as mental health goes. But after that, leave it to the professionals. So,
well, hold that, Coach K, because that is one of the questions. So I do want to get into that. Okay. The next question, because I know that there is a big difference in the way we handle mental health now versus the way our parents and our grandparents did. So I kind of want to discuss the shift of importance for mental health awareness. My parents, the way they were very open to us expressing how we felt. They were very understanding, and they wanted to have the conversation with us because they felt as children, they were shut down. Like, children are to be seen and not heard. We don't want to know what you're thinking. We don't know how you feel. Be quiet. If another adult called and told something, whether it was a teacher or a neighbor, it was the adults were. So they didn't really have a chance to have a voice as a child. They didn't care how they felt. And this is their generation. So they were very adamant about us being able to express how we felt. And they were like, well, even if my teacher would call home, they were like, well, what happened? I want to know your side of the story so I can get the full picture. Tell me what happened, but you have to be honest about it. And you're like, how are you feeling? What's going on? Every day I would come home. How was school? Did anything happen? Is everything going on? They were very open with us in communication, and they wanted to know what we thought. Even after we watched a movie, my dad would be like, well, how'd you feel about that? What do you think about it? What are your thoughts? What did you get from it? He always wanted to make sure we were thinkers and we could express how we felt. But I know that is not what they got when they were children. So they were almost like on the opposite side of that spectrum. So,
you know what? That's a great example, and we see it now. What I have noticed is that younger, like the newest generation, try not to abuse their kids, like not to use the, whipping and like, using the belt and all the stuff, which is, I used to get my ass whooped every day. I'm not gonna lie. Like, oh, you didn't do the dishes, psh, la chancla. So I would get it like, but honestly, nowadays I feel like I don't do it with my daughter. I don't want to do it. I take the patience to understand what's going on, why she's not understanding my request and things like that. And I'm more patient, but because I understand that abuse is abuse. And not just because of that, but I also remember my parents saying, "Oh, I do it because I love you." But then I went into an abusive relationship where I suffer from domestic violence, and this person used to tell me, "Because I love you." And then I used to believe that that's what it was. So I went through therapy like 3 years after that relationship. So that got me understanding that it was something from my childhood trauma in a way, and it's linked. So we don't think this affects them, but then if we don't if we don't even explain our kids, and then we as parents tend to underestimate our kids. Just because they're little, we think that they don't understand, and it's not like that. They actually get it. So when you explain it the right way and use the right words to them, they will understand it. Explain the whys, how, and everything step by step. And if you do that, it's easier for them to do what you're asking for them to understand the why they need to do it at the time that you're asking for, and the consequences. But before, it was like, oh, I'm just gonna whoop your butt and then I'm gonna to send you to your room, but without explanation of nothing. So it was not like I'm gonna explain the reason why I'm doing it. And then it's just, I was just being abused and I didn't know. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's kind of like the biggest example I have now, and especially in my culture, because here for us it's still very normal. We do have now a law that if you see a parent kind of like abusing their kid, you can call and say, but here Latinos, we think that chancla is the remedy for everything. I think my mom could probably throw me my chancla nowadays. Like she wouldn't care. Even my dad, like sometimes he's like, he feels like he wants to do it with my daughter. And I'm like, nope, no, you're not gonna do that. But because he still has that mentality, but we have to change that and kind of see how this affects when you're an adult.
So yeah, I think we're living in a time of two extremes of everybody currently living, which is, I think, the baby boomers are the oldest, right? So the baby boomers and Gen X, they were way too much. That made millennials and Gen Z, in my opinion, do way too little. So right now you see, and I'm not even talking in this form of spanking. I'll just mean the passiveness, the passive nature of parents, and the self-diagnosis of, like parents are way too passive with their children. So hopefully Gen, whatever the next thing, double A, maybe they'll get it right. But I believe we're definitely living in a time of two extremes. And I believe that I think it was what Kelly said. I think there is a medium to it. There absolutely is. I believe me and my wife are going to achieve that, because she is trying to do the whole Gen Z thing with the kids. Like, oh, she's very soft, but that's her nature. All right. I was raised by Nigerians. Okay. I got my tail whooped by surprise. I didn't even know I did nothing. Somebody else did it. And I'm in my room like, so I got whooped one time coming from basketball practice because my brother did something and I was supposed to catch it before he did it. Right. So I come from that generation. So hopefully, the one thing that I do see much value in is that when I do discipline my children, I do need to go to them and go over not even why it happened, what they did, how it made me feel, why it's important for them to understand why this is wrong, why I will not tolerate it again. Now I even look to see if I did too much. I'll even apologize to them, and let them know I shouldn't have had that reaction. But I'm not. It's not really a "cause I said so" type of thing. I'm trying to get out of that. That's how my parents were. It's really listen. You're going to get discipline from me, and it's going to be consistent. but I do want to partner with them in a sense to where it's like, listen, I really want to partner with you in your behavior modification, right? I don't want it to be just what I said and everything that I want to happen. I want you to understand not only how I feel about what you did, but how you feel. I want to process that, right? What led up to it and everything. So I feel like my kids are covered that way, right? So because they got the nurturing mom, she got that down pat, right? So I think that where Kelly said, asking them how they feel and never really breaking that trust they have in me, right? And I feel like that trust is broken. I'm gonna tell you, my parents did it to me because at some point, especially as a teenager, you realize you're just getting beat for no reason. You're getting beat because they're mad, and it broke a lot of trust. Like, man, y'all are great parents, but in this way, y'all kind of terrible. So I don't want to break that trust with them, and I'm gonna do my best to try to nurture that relationship as long as they're in this house.
I think the discipline matters, like, when it's necessary, right? Because a lot of times, like, I thank my parents for sometimes disciplining me the way they did, even though it was a little extreme, but they probably had it done to them and whatever, right? But when I came to Canada, because back home there's no laws against like not hitting your kids, right? They hit you at school, they hitting me with rulers if you don't do your homework. So I had to make sure my homework was on time. Like, that discipline came here. So when I came here, everything was so slack. The whole public system was so slack. I was like, oh my God, I learned this in like grade 1, where they were teaching it here at the grade 4. Like, so it was like a little bit more slower, but like, I appreciate that. However, like the worst, the bad parts, the traumas, because we always gonna have, like, our memories are more prominent, or like we don't really remember the happiest parts of our lives, more so the traumas, right? The traumas always take over. So I feel like it carried on over to my adulthood, and with like parenting my child in the beginning, because I was a new mom, and like stress came on that. Like, there was hormones, like a lot of like a lot of emotions. But however, I had to catch myself, because sometimes you have to like take accountability, because I wouldn't have known that I was like, I really had to like step back for a minute and be like, hey, I'm acting like my parents. This is not, I saw the fear in my daughter's eyes, right? I don't want her to fear me like that. However, I caught myself being accountable, and like I took mindful classes, and I wanted to share that, like, there's in our community, we have the luxury of going, like, checking for these things, because back home in third world countries, they don't have this support, right? So here we can actually like seek it if you catch yourself, because no one can tell you that you have a mental illness without you actually like accepting it, right? You have to accept it, and then you can get help. A lot of times we think they're being like they're belittling us or degrading us, whichever way they come, right? So yeah, I think we should kind of like step back sometimes and like look at it, the whole situation.
I want to ask Nelson real quick. Do you ever, I'm sure you've been a professional for a long time, but do your loved ones ever expect you to like act perfect, like to never have a bad day because you're a counselor? Like, how dare you? Do you get that ever?
Yeah, you become everyone's counselor, and it really sucks because you can't really be vulnerable around your family that much. So that's, to me, that's why I maintain my own therapist. That's why I always make sure I have people in my life that don't see me in that light, because once anybody kind of knows, once you dive into this profession, you become the end all be all for how to deal with anything in life, and everybody will just call you and dump on you like everything that's going on in their life, and you're just expected to just take it and really not blink. But yeah, it is very much like that in my family, and I ran into the same problem as a young and budding counselor. Like, once I got my license and started learning things, I was all too eager to diagnose my family and figure out what the heck was going on with them. So I kind of set myself up for failure a little bit by just listening to everybody's story and learning why my mother acts the way she does, why my father did. And they were the generation that was before me, my grandparents and my parents, those were very tight-lipped, generations where they really did not talk about traumatic events that happened in our life. And as a result, we received the results of their hurt. So all the behaviors that were dysfunctional that we saw from them and that we took as like, this is the way that we should be, or the way things are, is all the result of them not dealing with their own stuff and thinking that it's not impacting the way they're parenting or the way anything is going. And we became a messed up generation. And Trigger Mike said a great thing in terms of being on witnessing like two extremes is they were so tight-lipped that you couldn't go to them with anything. And this generation now is so loose with everything. Everything has become about your feelings and being, having to be happy all the time. And so we've just gone from two extremes. Both don't make sense. Neither one of them are good. Balance is what we needed, but everything kind of just had a trickle effect from generation to generation.
I agree with that. It's like the opposite, because I do think that there should be a balance. It shouldn't be, everything. Because I do feel like this generation is in a way is soft. Like everything's about your feelings. You get so hurt so quickly, so offended so easily, when they just used to be like tough and strong back then. But also there were things that they weren't allowed to address, or they didn't even know to address, or weren't allowed to talk about, or things were taboo. Like, oh, you said sex. You're not allowed to say that word out in public. Now everybody is just so free to be me and talks about everything in a disgusting, perverted way. So it's like, there is a fine balance. There is a healthy balance. Like, how do you achieve that?